Hello my dear friends and welcome back to another Star Wars video. So today we're returning to Andor Season 2, and following my breakdown of episodes 7, 8 and 9, we're going to focus on what was undeniably one of the most dark and terrifying moments for live action Star Wars. Oh yes, the Ghorman Massacre. We finally got to see it. As far as comparing this to other acts of Imperial genocide which have actually been shown, this has to be one of the most brutal. And while everyone's talking about Syril Karn's death, at least his demise was swift. Imagine being Enza Rylands. I don't know about you guys, but I really don't like the idea of being chucked around by a droid with the strength of, I don't know, a freaking transformer, and then being slammed to my death by hitting the concrete. But did you know it was almost so much worse? I can't believe I'm saying it, but they wanted to go further with the gore, if you pardon the pun. As mortifying as some of those scenes were, according to showrunner Tony Gilroy, they had to scrap some of the most horrific stuff, including the original introduction of K2SO. It was going to be very different to what we just saw. Tony reveals there was a lot of reshuffling of episodes, especially between the events of 9 and 10. 9 was going to be a buffer episode, and then all of the stuff with Mon's speech, the Senate, Bail Organa, was going to happen in 10. And so you're probably wondering, so what was episode 9? It was going to be K2SO's introduction, but instead of just being the couple of scenes of Andor taking him back to Yavin, it was going to be an entire episode. An episode described as, quote, a horror movie. I understand horror isn't everyone's cup of tea, but now Tony's talking my language. And I don't know if you remember, but at the Andor premiere, Tony said there is a Star Wars horror movie in the works, one that we've heard nothing about. Maybe Lucasfilm took his K2SO idea and decided, we're not going to do it in Andor because of budget constraints, but we're going to turn it into a movie. I would love another Rogue One spin-off. Dan Gilroy had an idea for an entirely self-contained episode that was originally going to be episode 209. It was a horror movie. K2 was about to have a very different introduction. In that episode, they had to bring this huge, ugly tanker ship to Yavin, and inside, there was a trapped KX droid. He was kind of like a hunting monster. It was a monster movie with K2 on it. Disney told them it was out of range. And I have to say guys, that sounds very different. It sounds like it was going to be amazing, but it also sounds a bit familiar. Do you guys remember at the end of the last episode? They're rebooting K2. In the scene before it, when Andor is looking for Bix, and he's just read her note, Cassian is told there is a freighter arriving later. What if that's a fragment of the original plan? So instead of Cassian taking home a KX unit from the Ghorman Massacre, K2 arrives on Yavin from that freighter. That would have been brutal because the minute they opened it up, if Tony's saying K2 was a hunter, I can imagine plenty of rebels would have been shot, thrown around, strangled, before they got him under control. So the creatives of the show had different ideas for how they were going to introduce K2SO. The horror idea is really cool, but I do actually love the version they ended up going with. But no versions were ever going to line up with the comic. And here's the thing, for those who say it's a big problem because the comic was canon, Dave Filoni said there is some truth to every story told in the Star Wars universe, even if it doesn't always line up. I don't like this approach, but there is a way to consolidate both stories. They could reframe the comic to be the cover-up story for how Cassian and K2 met, if it became dangerous to mention the Ghorman Massacre. The version in the comic could have been the fake story made up by the rebellion. This has happened before. Remember, Cassian's original homeworld was meant to be Fest. But Season 1 brilliantly explained this by Marva putting Fest as Cassian's documented homeworld to cover up the fact he was from Canary. So it could be a similar situation. And returning to the Gorman Massacre, I think one of the most impressive things about it wasn't necessarily that it was a bloodbath, that the Empire performed atrocities and pushed propaganda, and how after it was done it was the Imperial soldiers who were mourned and not the Gormans. It was how this event tied up so many plot threads and themes from the first season. In terms of galactic impact, I don't think Star Wars fans realize just how significant the Imperial occupation of Gorman really was, what it represented in terms of Palpatine. This wasn't a backwater planet, this wasn't a planet of non-sentience. As Partagaz says in the Krennic meeting, Gorman is not without political power. Gorman was a well-represented planet in the Senate with a lot of wealth. Everyone in the galaxy had some kind of connection to Gorman, because a lot of their clothes were manufactured there. As this comment says, this is like asking what the difference is between a massacre of civilians by government forces in a third world country versus a first world country. Atrocities and massacres were taking place across the galaxy, but this one got everyone's attention because Gorman was a household name. To core worlds, suddenly an imperial devastation affected them, and the economic instability that would follow would actually affect something they care about. It's not the scale of the atrocity, it's who it happens to. These were rich and powerful people. This was big news. And remember, the Empire had a pro-human bias, so them taking out a planet that wasn't full of aliens was a real shock. And as we saw, only a handful of people knew the real reason that the Emperor was interested in Gorman, Calcite. Now I want to spend the rest of this video talking about a big misconception. The Ghorman Massacre was also able to tie up a personal rivalry from the first season, but I think fans are getting something very wrong. I've already spoken in my breakdown about how Syril's death possessed so many layers of irony. But a truly fascinating debate I've seen going round is whether Syril Karn was a fascist. Was he really a bad guy? Well, I think the ambiguity was kind of the point, because Tony Gilroy is trying to show that even the bad guys have nuance, have layers of humanity to them. No human being is all good or all bad. And that is a fundamental point Andor has been trying to demonstrate time and again, on both the Imperial side and the Rebel side. Look at Luthen, look at Saw Gerrera. In Rogue One, Cassian literally says, "We've all done terrible things on behalf of the rebellion." The whole point of Syril's arc is that he's the useful idiot that actual fascists and authoritarians use to further their goals. There's no denying he was on the wrong side of history, but his allegiance was never as sycophantic and authoritarian as Dedra Meero's. I think Season 2 Episode 8 proves this. He finally realized how much he'd been taken advantage of. He was strong-willed, but naive. He believed the propaganda the Empire was making the galaxy more peaceful, but in his final moments, he saw the truth, and a part of me thinks he actually sympathized with the Gormans. The tragedy of Syril is that despite being very unloved, rather cold-hearted, he believed he was fighting for the side that was gonna bring peace, not the side that orchestrated a planet-wide devastation. There has been a bit of disagreement about this. Some say no, Syril was a fascist, but I think Tony Gilroy always intended some kind of redemption in his final moments. And here's what Tony said about it. "I feel terribly sorry for Syril. I have great affection for him. I think he was a victim in every sense. He's a romantic, but also a fantasist. He could have gone in either direction, if he was shown some love or some light. And that was my takeaway too. Imagine if Edie, Syril's mother, had been more nurturing, more validating, instead of pushing him down. I'm not trying to downplay some of his more questionable actions, but like Tony says, in a different life, maybe Syril would have had a very different outcome. I was actually rather saddened by his death. I was hoping he was going to make it right till the end. A lot of fans are saying, well no, Syril was on board with Imperial philosophy, but I personally definitely saw a shift this season. At one point, I thought he was going to leave Dedra for that Gorman girl, but ultimately his downfall was his original mission. His impulses got the best of him, and I thought the way his death was handled was perfect. And can we just talk about the phenomenal tension across the last 3 episodes? All with the amazing backdrop of the Gorman chant, "We are the Ghor, the galaxy is watching." And yet, like I said, the Imperials framed it as the Ghormans being the perpetrators. Across news channels and broadcasts, they were talking about the Empire's fallen heroes, not the Ghorman victims, and showing us the lies the galaxy was hearing rendered Mon Mothma's speech so much more powerful, calling Palpatine out, calling him the monster that will soon come for us all. Share your thoughts down below, my dear friends, subscribe for more, and may the Force be with you, always.